Where did you all serve?
The first duty station that I went to was Corpus Christi, Texas. I was stationed there for 3 years. Then I went to Long Beach, California. There was a naval hospital there, which is no longer in existence. I was there for 3 years. Then I went to the Naval Hospital in Okinawa, Japan, which is way down on the Ryukyu Islands. It's actually the site of one of the worst battles of World War II. And there's a big Marine and Air Force and Navy. It's a big military presence. There's a large Marine division there. Kadena Air Force Base is there. And then the Navy hospital is there because the Navy medical department takes care of the Marines. So wherever the Marines are, the Navy medical department is there because they take care of them. So we provided, care for the active duty and their dependents, as well as the Air Force and what other services were there as well. After Okinawa, I went back to school at the University of Washington in Seattle for my bachelor's degree in nursing. The Navy paid for that, which was very nice. I was paid to go to school, but I also then incurred a 4-year obligation to pay them back for that. And I spent that time in San Diego at the hospital there, which is what we call one of the big three. It's a big teaching hospital, and I mean big. It was called the Pink Palace in the Park because it was all these pinkish stucco buildings in the park, across from the park and close to the zoo in San Diego. And while I was there, they actually built a new hospital and we moved to that. But the Pink Palace in the Park was just a culmination of many, many buildings that were built up through the different wars to accommodate the number of casualties and patients that they had come in. Most of those buildings don't exist anymore because they now use that ground for other things and built other buildings. While I was stationed in San Diego, I went out on the USNS Mercy, which is in the picture in front of us. It's one of the Navy's 2 hospital ships. They are 2 converted deadweight tankers that have 1,000-bed capabilities. They can carry up to 1,000 patients, fully staffed with people to carry that, because you obviously have to have quite a staff to carry for that. But we had 12 operating rooms, so we were basically a floating trauma care that other places, would send their patients back to us. From when I came back from that, I left on the ship on August 11th of 1990 on less than 24 hours notice. Was gone for 7 months and actually walked back in 7 months later, March 11th. So out on August 11th and back on March 11th. The ship was based up in San Francisco, Oakland Bay, and so we went from Oakland to the Philippines and took on supplies, and then we went on through the Straits of Formosa and into the Hormuz, and then we went into the Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf, and we stayed there for as long as the conflict took place. And this was in 1990 during Desert Shield, during the buildup, and then Desert Storm during the actual conflict and attack. When the conflict ended and people were able to go home, some people rode the ship home. I opted to fly home. And I'm glad that I did, because it was nice to get home after being gone for that length of time. But we flew from Bahrain, which is where we were based, over Italy and up to Brussels, Belgium, and then into Andrews Air Force Base on the East Coast, and then to Travis Air Force Base up in San Francisco area, and then I flew back down to San Diego. So I literally made a world tour around the world, a trip around the world. After San Diego, after the hospital, I went to the University of San Diego, and I went to get my master's degree. Again, the Navy paid for it, and I paid them back with 3 hours of my time. But I was already, at this point, at the 18, 19-year mark, so I was committed to a full retirement. I went to Portsmouth, Virginia, which is by Norfolk, Virginia, on the East Coast. Again, staying within my operating room specialty there. I spent 3 years there, and during that time, I was a brand new commander, fairly senior officer, and so I moved into a really much higher administrative management role, even still doing clinical and doing patient care, but taking a lot more administrative responsibility. From there, I went to Yokosuka, Japan, just outside of Tokyo. And there it was fun because, again, I was a higher ranking officer, so I had more responsibility. And I lived out in town in the community, had a little Japanese house with tatami mats, and neighbors. Most of my neighbors were all Japanese. I was probably the only gaijin or American in the neighborhood. Not unusual to walk 4 blocks down to the grocery store and buy groceries that I really didn't know what I was buying because you couldn't read what they were.
Yeah.
Recognize them, but you couldn't tell what you couldn't read them. You take the train to work, take the train many places. While I was there, got a chance to tour a lot. I had the chance when I was in Okinawa to visit mainland Japan one time, and during that time frame I saw Hiroshima, or Hiroshima, whichever anybody wants to pronounce it. But during this tour, my sister came back with me from a vacation time, and we both went down to visit the Peace Memorial at Hiroshima again, which was an incredible experience to be down there. I also got to go to the Sapporo Ice Festival up in the northern part of the island, and a lot of different festivals around around Yokosuka because of official things that we went to, but also fun things. Nagano, the Olympics were held at Nagano while I was there. I did not go to the Olympics, but later on, my neighbors and I did go, and I did visit the site where the Olympics had been held. So that was pretty cool. From Yokosuka, I came back to Bremerton, Washington, which is west of Seattle. There's a naval hospital there. There's also a naval shipyard there, which they do ship repair and ship building, but they also have active duty naval ships there, several carriers. There's also Bangor Submarine Base, so submarines were there. And we had several subclinics. And while I was there, I was, again, in management and administration over the operating room. And then I retired from there in August of 2002.
Did you serve during a war?
I did serve during a war. I served during Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm in 1990 and 1991. Some people call it the first Gulf War because what we did was Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and the purpose of going in there was to get him was to liberate Kuwait and get him out of there. When we did that and when we left, he was still in power and living in Iraq, even though Kuwait had been freed. And then later on, they went back in and went into the second, what some people would call the Second Gulf War, at which eventually he was removed from power. And then they're still now over there in between Afghanistan and Iraq. So they're still working over there.
Did you see combat?
I did not see combat. I was on the USNS Mercy. We are covered by the Geneva Convention. We always kind of wondered if they would really honor that or not, because there's a lot of theories that if you take out medical, which is the big support to the combat troops and stuff, then you can really undermine a combat or a war. But we were safe. We were on the big white hospital ships, and we were out in the middle of the Persian Gulf. We went into port several times at Bahrain, and then we also went pierside at El Jubail and Adamam. We also went down to the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, and in there for some ship work, but also we went in different times to get patients, and the USNS Comfort was also deployed at the same time, and we were often side by side or very close to each other. We're both 1,000 yards long, so we're not exactly floating side by side, but and we alternated being on station and being the primary person to take on patients. Our patients before the actual conflict started, during the buildup, were injuries that happened to people when they were training. Because the troops, we had a buildup of a good 4 to 5 months before the bombing and the ground war actually started. And you can't do nothing. The troops would get their equipment and they'd go out to the desert and they would train. And unfortunately, there were sometimes there would be some injuries. But however, when the ground war did start, and there were casualties, we did see some of those patients towards the end of my time out there. They had been actually treated by their buddies, and then also at the battalion aid station, and then the field hospital that was on land, and then came out to us. So we were the trauma receiving center from these other places. So,
what kind of injuries did you have to deal with, like during training? And
the injuries that we saw that we took care of broken bones. The patient that I personally worked with that was a actual casualty who had gotten injured. He was a young Marine who had got shot in his femur, the large bone in your leg, and they were taking the airport at Kuwait when he got hit and broke his leg, and then also a lot of shrapnel and stuff. And so he was treated and then came back to us, and we did continual care on him and eventually transferred him on for further care. During the time of the buildup, a lot of the cases that we did, believe it or not, I think one of the doctors that was the busiest was the urologist, because they were in the heat, and even though they were trying to keep everybody very well hydrated, there were a number of people that developed kidney or bladder stones. And so he was busy taking out stones different times than anything. And we did some smaller things as things came up, but fractures. We had one young man who got very sick with an ear infection, and it communicated with his brain, and so we ended up going in the middle of the night on a ship floating in the middle of the Gulf and did a craniotomy to take care of that. And eventually he was transferred on to, I think, Germany and then back to the States for long-term care. But so pretty much your general, injuries being gunshot wounds. And I don't know that we saw a lot of people with the IEDs that we see now, because there just wasn't that kind of a ground war that there is now. It was over like in 4 days. And so, and again, the goal was just to free Kuwait, and once they left, that was when we were done.
What did you believe at the time? Was it at stake in the war? What did you think you were fighting for?
Well, we knew in theory, or we knew that the purpose, or what everybody said we were going to do, was to free Kuwait, because Saddam and his army had invaded Kuwait and taken it over. There's a lot of debate with all of the oil-rich countries over there that there was some relation that all had to do with oil, and that may well be true, but the main premise of going in 1990 and 91 was to free Kuwait and liberate Kuwait, and that's what they did. We really didn't treat any of the Iraqi armies if they were injured. Some of the people that were on the ground in the field probably took care of them, but none of them came back to the ship. We only took care of Americans, and then at the end of the war, all of the POWs that had been freed came on the Mercy. And so we treated 2 Italian POWs and then our own POWs that needed treatment, and then they came back to the States.
How did you feel about the enemies you were fighting, and how do you feel about them now?
I actually honestly don't have any negative feelings, probably because I wasn't on the ground or in the sand and that close to that kind of activity. It was an area of the world that I'd never expected to ever see. I'm glad that I did, because I think I learned a lot. I always like going to different places and learning about different things. I think that, like with any conflict, that some of the enemy soldiers, or the people that they believe in it, and they are doing it because that's what they believe, and some are drafted or just doing what they have to do because they can't get out of it, which I think is probably true in a lot of situations. So I really don't have any hard feelings